Humanity desperately clings to a beautiful, fragile, and utterly comforting illusion regarding our own nature. We love to wrap ourselves in the elegant, sophisticated veil of civilization. We meticulously construct elaborate social classes. We pin shining medals to our chests, and we surround ourselves with the insulating comforts of modern architecture. We look at our tailored clothing, our complex laws, and our bank accounts, and we genuinely believe that we have successfully evolved beyond the savage, ruthless rules of the animal kingdom. We believe that we are no longer predators, but enlightened masters of the earth. But this civilization is nothing more than a thin, delicate layer of paint covering a very ancient, very dark core. Because when you are stripped of your titles, your wealth, and your walls, when you are abandoned in the infinite, pitch-black expanse of the open ocean, with the cold breath of death grazing your neck, the elegant veil of civilization instantly violently disintegrates. The fragile rules of morality and empathy are effortlessly washed away by the indifferent waves. And what remains underneath is a terrifying, primal, and deeply savage survival instinct that awakens the true monster sleeping inside the human mind. This is not just a story of a shipwreck. This is the dark, horrific, and brutally honest story of how quickly a society of civilized men can mutate into absolute demons. The year is 1816. Europe is attempting to rebuild itself following the apocalyptic bloody chaos of the Napoleonic Wars. In an effort to reclaim its global prestige and re-establish colonial dominance, the restored French monarchy launches a grand naval expedition. The location is the deep, dark, and notoriously treacherous waters off the western coast of Africa. Leading this expedition is the pride of the French Navy, a massive, fast, and beautifully armed frigate named the Medusa. Aboard this colossal wooden leviathan were exactly 400 human souls. It was a complete microcosm of 19th century French society. Deep in the dark, damp, claustrophobic lower decks were the common soldiers, the hardened sailors, and the poor civilian laborers. High above them, basking in the sun and sipping fine wine on the polished mahogany quarterdeck, were the elite, the wealthy aristocrats, the esteemed scientists, and the high-ranking politicians. But the most dangerous man on the ship was not a mutinous sailor or a criminal. It was the man holding the ultimate authority, Captain Hugues du Roy de Chaumareys. Chaumareys was not appointed to command this magnificent warship because of his maritime brilliance, his navigational skill, or his bravery in combat. He was handed the wheel of the Medusa purely as an act of political nepotism. He was a wealthy aristocrat who had not actually sailed a ship in over 20 years. He was a ghost of the old regime, entirely blinded by his own elevated social status and utterly incompetent in the brutal mathematics of the sea. As the Medusa aggressively sailed southward toward the colony of Senegal, the seasoned officers and veteran navigators noticed a terrifying geographical reality. The captain was recklessly, stubbornly steering the massive frigate far too close to the dangerous, shallow coastal waters of Mauritania. The experienced sailors desperately pleaded with Chaumareys. They pointed to the darkening color of the water and the shifting oceanic currents, warning him of the invisible underwater reefs ahead. But the captain, deeply insulted that commoners would dare question his aristocratic authority, aggressively dismissed their warnings. His arrogance was absolute. He believed his noble blood somehow made him immune to the rigid, unforgiving geography of the ocean floor. The ocean, however, cares absolutely nothing for royal titles. The date is July 2nd, 1816. High noon on a blindingly bright, scorching day in the Atlantic. Without any warning, the dark water beneath the Medusa suddenly, violently rebelled. A deafening, earth-shattering crunch of tearing oak and shattering pine echoed across the vast ocean. The massive frigate aggressively slammed into an invisible, ancient underwater sandbank, known to maps as the Arguin Bank. The sheer kinetic impact was catastrophic. The incredibly heavy wooden ship groaned in profound structural agony, permanently lodged in the crushing sand and shallow water. The majestic conqueror of the sea was instantly transformed into a dying, bleeding, trapped animal. Panic, the ultimate destroyer of social order, immediately infected the 400 souls on board. As heavy ocean waves began to systematically, methodically batter the wooden hull to splinters, a horrifying logistical reality became apparent. The Medusa, representing the very pinnacle of French naval power, possessed only 6 lifeboats, 6 small, fragile wooden boats for 400 terrified people. A mathematical death sentence. It was at this exact moment that the elegant, polite rules of society were violently discarded. Survival of the fittest mutated into survival of the privileged. In a profound, disgusting display of cowardice and class betrayal, the heavily armed officers took complete control of the evacuation. The 6 lifeboats were immediately seized by Captain Chaumareys, the wealthy politicians, and the aristocratic elite. They packed themselves comfortably into the boats, carrying their expensive luggage, fine wines, and navigational equipment. But for the remaining 147 people, the poor soldiers, the common sailors, and the lower-class civilians, there were no boats left. Under the threat of loaded muskets, these 147 completely expendable lives were forced onto a hastily constructed, terrifyingly inadequate wooden raft. Built from the shattered masts and torn decking of the dying frigate, the raft was an architectural nightmare. It measured a mere 65 feet long and 23 feet wide. When 147 terrified human beings were herded onto this incredibly small platform, the sheer crushing weight of their bodies caused an immediate disaster. The heavy wood groaned, and the entire raft sank heavily beneath the surface of the ocean. Before the journey even began, these abandoned souls found themselves completely immobilized, standing shoulder to shoulder, submerged up to their waists in the freezing, dark ocean water. There was absolutely no room to sit. There was no room to take a single step. It was a suffocating open-air prison cell floating on a bottomless abyss. The initial cowardly plan dictated that the elite lifeboats would securely tie heavy ropes to the raft and tow it slowly toward the African coast. For a few agonizing miles, this fragile, highly unequal convoy moved across the waves. But the heavy submerged raft full of poor soldiers was a massive anchor, dangerously slowing down the lifeboats of the elite. The aristocrats in the boats looked back at the suffering mass of humanity trailing behind them. They did not feel empathy. They only felt a deep selfish fear that the sinking raft would somehow drag them down into the dark water too. And then, human history recorded one of its most chilling sociopathic acts of betrayal. Without warning, without a word of apology, a heavy iron axe was raised in one of the lifeboats. With a few sharp, violent strikes, the thick tow ropes connecting the lifeboats to the raft were intentionally, permanently severed. The heavy hemp ropes aggressively snapped and fell silently into the dark, churning ocean. It was the sound of 147 death warrants being signed in cold blood. The people on the raft watched in absolute paralyzed horror as the lifeboats unfurled their sails and slowly, quietly faded away into the horizon. The captain had abandoned his crew. The elite had abandoned the poor. Humanity had abandoned the raft. They were now completely alone, suspended on a sinking pile of wood in the absolute center of an infinitely vast, deeply indifferent ocean. They had no map, they had no compass, they had no sails to catch the wind. In the chaos of the boarding, the heavy barrels of fresh drinking water had rolled off the raft and vanished into the deep. Their only provisions for 147 people were a few crates of hard biscuits and several large wooden casks of cheap wine. Claustrophobia is terrifying in a dark enclosed room, but the claustrophobia of the open ocean is a uniquely mind-shattering phenomenon. You are surrounded by an infinite, perfectly flat, boundless horizon that actively mocks your absolute immobility. You cannot walk, you cannot run, you cannot hide. You are trapped waist-deep in freezing water, staring into an empty void that slowly, methodically consumes your sanity. On the very first night, the ocean delivered its first brutal punishment. A violent storm tore across the pitch-black water. Massive, crushing waves continuously swept violently over the submerged raft. Panicked, terrified of being pulled into the black abyss, the crowd desperately rushed toward the center of the raft. In the absolute darkness, men blindly trampled each other. They crushed the weak beneath their heavy, waterlogged boots. Dozens of people drowned or were suffocated to death on that very first night, their bodies silently slipping away into the deep. When the sun rose on the second day, the true agonizing biological nightmare began. The equatorial sun beat down mercilessly, acting as a massive, blinding magnifying glass on the surface of the ocean. The intense ultraviolet radiation severely blistered their faces and cracked their lips. The salt water violently burned the open wounds on their legs and waists. Desperate for any form of hydration, the men began to aggressively consume the only liquid they had left, the casks of wine. Dehydration, extreme heat, and severe alcohol intoxication proved to be an apocalyptic combination. The wine did not hydrate them. It merely unlocked the dark primal demons sleeping in their exhausted minds. By the third night, fear had fully mutated into violent, hallucinatory madness. A large group of soldiers, completely losing their grip on reality, decided that death in the ocean was better than the agonizing torture of the raft. But they did not want to die alone. They decided to violently destroy the raft and kill anyone who tried to stop them. In the pitch-black, waist-deep water, an absolute chaotic bloodbath erupted. It was a blind, horrific war fought in the dark. Men viciously attacked their own comrades with hunting knives, bayonets, and bare hands. The wounded, the weak, and the unarmed were mercilessly pushed off the edge, swallowed entirely by the indifferent dark waves. Nature did not need to lift a finger. The civilized men were actively, enthusiastically slaughtering each other. By the dawn of the fourth day, the raft was a floating slaughterhouse. Only 67 people remained alive. The hunger had now reached a level that fundamentally rewrites human biology. They tried to chew on the heavy leather belts of their uniforms. They chewed on their hats. They tried to swallow pieces of the canvas sail, but it was not enough. Starvation is a slow, methodical erasure of the soul. And then, the final darkest boundary of human morality was permanently crossed. The survivors stared with hollow, sunken, desperate eyes at the lifeless, sun-baked bodies of the friends they had just murdered. Slowly, silently, hunting knives were drawn. Men began to systematically slice small, raw pieces of flesh from the dead, consuming it under the glaring, indifferent sun. Some dried the meat on the wooden planks to make it last longer. Cannibalism, the ultimate horrific taboo of the civilized world, had instantly become the new, accepted normal of the raft. The aristocratic, refined Europeans had devolved into the exact savage beasts they so proudly claimed to have evolved past. As the agonizing days bled into weeks, the raft became a floating hell of rotting flesh, madness, and disease. The strong realized that the weak were consuming the precious, limited remaining rations of wine and human meat. In a cold, calculated, and deeply sociopathic decision, the strongest survivors began to systematically murder the sick and the dying while they slept, throwing them into the sea. They had to completely execute their own empathy just to buy one more day of existence. On the morning of the 13th day, the agonizing nightmare was abruptly interrupted. A tiny distant silhouette of a ship appeared on the flat horizon. It was the Argus, a rescue vessel. When the crew of the Argus finally lowered their boats and approached the drifting raft, the sight that greeted them shattered their minds. Out of the original 147 souls, only 15 men were left alive. But the creatures standing waist-deep in the blood-stained water were no longer human. They were skeletal, sun-scorched, hollow-eyed ghosts. They stood silently among piles of completely stripped, sun-bleached human bones, staring blankly at their rescuers. They were so entirely broken by their descent into the abyss that 5 of the 15 survivors simply dropped dead shortly after touching dry land, their bodies permanently corrupted by the trauma. When the horrific, undeniable truth of the cannibalism, the mutiny, and the aristocratic betrayal reached Europe, the world was completely paralyzed by shock. A young, brilliant painter named Théodore Géricault became obsessed with the tragedy. He interviewed the survivors, studied rotting corpses in the morgue, and painted his colossal, haunting masterpiece, The Raft of the Medusa. He forever immortalized the exact moment of their descent into primal savagery, forcing society to stare directly into its own dark reflection. The Medusa is the ultimate bloody monument to the fragility of human civilization. We proudly wear our elegant clothes and boast of our moral superiority. We believe our rules and our empathy define us. But the ocean knows the terrifying truth. The ocean knows that beneath the polished veneer, we are only ever a few missed meals and a broken rope away from becoming the monsters we fear. We are merely animals in a wooden box, waiting for the lights to go out. The ocean simply watches indifferently as we devour ourselves. History is not dead. It is never dead. It merely slumbers beneath the dark, freezing, churning waves of our forgotten past, patiently waiting to be remembered by the arrogant generations that inevitably follow. We will meet again in the next era, when humanity once more forgets the terrifying silent warnings written in severed ropes and shattered bones. You are watching past Resurrected. Until the next era.